Welcome back, Trek fans, to the Best of Trek, Worst of Trek, the show where we objectively rank every live-action episode of the Star Trek franchise. I'm your host, Dustin Wing. Today we're starting off at number 751, entitled Bad VFX and a Recast, or The Alternative Factor. In a rare miss for Season 1 TOS, this episode has an okay resolution by its ending, but getting there is definitely not half the fun. Nor was it for the producers of this episode when on the first morning of filming, the guest star didn't show up. The part was hastily recast, and you can just tell that this guy is reading his already badly written lines badly. The episode was almost scrapped entirely, and I personally wish it had. A time-space distortion of some kind happens in a nearby star system to the Enterprise. Starfleet immediately contacts them about finding out what happened, because the effect is felt all over the galaxy apparently. It's a really bad visual effects shot of a nebula fading in and out over the bridge scene. It's the quickest turnaround time in orders coming from Starfleet as something happens in Trek history. When the landing party encounters a small ship on a planet, the pilot, named Lazarus, immediately falls in overdramatic fashion off a cliff. The rest of the episode is weird filler plot like this, and more bad visual effects and spinning footage of this guy seeing his antimatter mirror universe self, like one does, and Lazarus stealing dilithium crystals from the Enterprise, which we find out helps him open a portal to some kind of purgatory where he and his antimatter self will end up trapped forever. But it will keep our two universes from colliding and canceling each other out, so, there's that. It's simultaneously sciencey and convoluted. I don't expect much out of 60s visual effects, but I expect a little more than this. In at 750, we have Shakespeare Lives Again, or The Conscience of the King. We're dropped into maybe the most worthless intro in Trek history. While starting in a Shakespearean scene is done many times through Trek, our first contact with this type of intro goes badly. At first, there's little context to distinguish that you're watching a play from normal 1960s Trek overacting and cheap set design until the camera pulls back and reveals the crew watching a stage show. A friend of Kirk's dies believing one of the actors is actually a former genocidal Federation colony governor, accused of indiscriminately killing half of his people to save the other half from starvation during a disaster. Kirk spends the rest of the episode trying to prove that he is, despite all his officers thinking he's just hunting his white whale Moby Dick style. In the end, it turns out he's right, but not before we get a ton of useless filler. There's a conversation at 17 minutes 30 seconds between McCoy and Spock that goes absolutely nowhere. It lets Bones get in a couple of racist against Vulcan remarks and prescribe himself some booze. Kirk, meanwhile, gets railroaded by the actor in question's daughter and asks things like,
"Surging and throbbing. Are you like that, Captain?"
The best thing we get out of these interactions is the idea that the ship has day-night lighting modes to mimic Earth daylight, which we see in later series. At 23 minutes 40, Lieutenant Colored Sugar Cubes calls the rec room because he's bored, while using the engineering console as a coaster for the only glass we see used for non-booze in the run of TOS. All other liquids are in paper cups. Anyway, he gets Uhura in the rec room to start playing the Vulcan harp and sing some filler into the episode while he's poisoned. Seriously, the rest of the episode drags to a slow and ridiculously crazy conclusion. What's the redeeming quality on this one? Kirk didn't shack up with Crazy this week. There's no good TV worth watching here. So why watch that when you can watch number 749, Captain Wesley of the Drunk Ship Enterprise, or The Naked Now. Being that this is a rewrite of an original series episode, The Naked Time, you're in for a dumpster fire of first season TNG goodness. I'm honestly not sure how TNG could go on to contain some of the best episodes of the franchise after the showing of bad television that's the entire first 2 seasons. But its pilot and first few episodes like this really leave a terrible mark on the franchise. The Enterprise encounters another Starfleet ship whose crew is all dead under mysterious circumstances. And then Geordi contracts the COVID virus, as evident by the sound effect that's played every time someone transmits the virus to somebody else. Anyway, the virus infects the whole ship, makes everyone feel drunk. A drunk Wesley Crusher creates a force field and takes the ship over from engineering, while the rest of the functioning crew try to regain control of the ship. Meanwhile, the non-functioning crew are about to have an orgy on the warp core.
Yeah, we're banging on the warp core, baby. Too hot.
Dr. Crusher shows she's got the hots for the man that ordered her husband to his death in a plot point that never pays off. Somehow even Data gets infected and gets enticed to use his sexual encounter subroutines for the first time, with none other than Tasha Yar. Towards the end, the star in the solar system they're in goes nova and kicks out a chunk of rock towards the Enterprise. I don't think novas work like this, but okay, it creates a clock to tick down to the end of the episode, where Dr. Crusher develops a cure and Data and Wesley end up saving the ship. The rest of the episode is packed with sexual innuendo, genital jokes, and an alcohol PSA. Jonathan Frakes once criticized this as the worst episode he ever did. But on the other hand, the director of the episode said of the 5 episodes of Trek that he got to direct, this was his favorite. Episodes like this, where the cast is meant to act out of the ordinary from their normal selves, works even less when it's the second episode in the series. You can't have funny contrast moments if you don't know how the characters behave in normal situations. I mean, it's still badly written and doesn't work today when you know the whole arc of these characters, but when you think about it in its first run, it makes it even worse than it is. I'm not the biggest fan of TOS, but it's also bad when the episode you rewrote to get here will end up much further up the rankings in this list. Which brings us to number 748, Lord of the Bonk Bonks, better known as Miri. We're less than 10 episodes into this list, and Trek is proving that kids just don't work as a plot point in TOS. In this wonderful gem in the Trek Vault, the Enterprise uncovers a planet that looks just like Earth, for no reason ever brought up again in the episode. That's about at a 1960s level of technology. How convenient. A landing party beams down into the Andy Griffith show's Mayberry, set in the Fallout video game universe, where they encounter a ghoul in the midst of going feral. Turns out all the other adults on the planet got a virus that turned them into zombies that died out hundreds of years ago, but that a group of slow-aging children are the last of what remains and are slowly becoming zombies themselves as they hit puberty. The landing party is infected with the virus and has only days to find a cure before they become feral ghouls themselves. Meanwhile, the children of the planet mess with them and try to kill them, because according to TOS, these are things that children do. As usual, McCoy finds a cure just in time, as Kirk keeps failing speech challenge rolls until he succeeds in a ridiculous classroom scene where the kids keep beating him up. There's creepy close-ups of small children enjoying the violence. Janice Rand has an absolutely ridiculous scene at 33 minutes where she screams vanity about how she's always wanted Kirk to look at her legs, but now they're hideous. This story's been parodied multiple times in other TV, notably the episode of South Park, The Wacky Molestation Adventure, where the South Park kids turn into the kids from this episode. Also, back to Fallout, there's a pretty obvious parody in the Fallout 3 settlement Little Lamplight, with a bunch of misfit kids that live in a cave and act very much like this, kicking out the older ones when they reach adulthood. It's just another creepy episode of Trek. Number 747, Greek Mythos Gone Wild, or Who Mourns for Adonis? With a ranking ending in 47, it can't be bad Trek, can it? In fact, it is in the worst of Trek. We've established that children don't work on TOS. What about Greek and Roman themed reuses? No, they don't work either, yet it keeps coming back. The intro of this wonderful Greek tragedy does the absolute bare minimum to actually intro, and then a ghost hand grabs the Enterprise. At least it's Gene Roddenberry's hand, but a ghost hand just grabbed the Enterprise in space. And I just can't even with this from the get-go. A landing party discovers the actual Greek god Apollo, who Kirk proceeds to get into a pissing match with for the rest of the episode. Apollo spends the episode as a god with a god complex. Big surprise, right? Kirk ends up winning when he has the Enterprise destroy Apollo's mini-temple, which turns out is the source of his power. In between, there's an uncomfortable love story between the archaeology and anthropology officer and Apollo. The A&A officer asks when they first beam down why she's going on an away mission. With a title like archaeology and anthropology officer, the better question is, why don't you go on every away mission? At one point, Apollo says that Spock is like Pan and Pan is boring. No, Spock is awesome, and this episode is boring. Speaking of Spock, that brings us to number 746, Spock's Brain, or better known as Spock's Brain. No satirically honest title does this infamous episode more justice. Many people in ranking lists have listed this as the worst episode of Trek, or at least of TOS. I say nay to you, citizens of the Federation. Spock's Brain is very bad Trek and TV in general, especially towards the end, but there are several worse. The plot, if you can call it that, consists of a literal fembot beaming onto the ship and stealing Spock's brain with her magical devices. Old Doc McCoy declares Spock worse than dead. McCoy rigs Spock's body up to be controlled by him while they go to a planet to look for his brain. The landing party first encounters a group of badly stuck-on, bearded Stone Age humanoids, and then goes into a technologically advanced series of caves and meet the dumbest race of people in all of Star Trek history. Yep, these folks make the Packlids look like genetically enhanced Julian Bashirs. The computer that provides for them has caused this race to lose all interest in learning or doing anything. They have some kind of salon steam chair that gives them a temporary stat boost of +10 to intelligence for a few hours when they need to do something complex, like stealing Spock's brain. McCoy uses it to try and reconnect Spock's brain, but he loses his stat buff before completing all the neural connections. And in the absolute worst part of this episode, Spock assists in his own brain surgery. This one is hokey, but the plot is just interesting enough in the first 3 acts before the brain surgery to keep it off the absolute bottom. Though 10 from the bottom of a 755 episode list is hardly an achievement.
Ah, computer. That program is available.
Thanks, Majel. Thanks, Majel.
No information available, Anton Caridian, prior to 20 years ago.
Thanks, Majel.
Affirmative.
Majel.
Riley Kevin, presently assigned USS Enterprise Communications Section.
Thanks, Majel.
I found him on the table.
Majel. Satire in Trek. Satire in Trek.
Are you unsatisfied with your meal of colorful cubes? That's fine as long as you get your daily intake of milk. Milk's good for you and contains 22 essential nutrients to build strong, healthy bodies. Got milk? Warning, engineering consoles are not to be used as coasters per Starfleet Regulation 4747, or this may happen to you.
We shall drink the sacramental wine.
I don't like the way you're walking. You've been into the sacramental wine again.
Mr. Checo, I think you've earned your pay for the week.
1 million space bucks!
Credits will define.
Space cash is only worth what you as a planet decided it was worth.
They were all sucked out into space.
Correction, sir. That's blown out.
It's Megamate. She's gone from suck to blow.
He was worse than dead.
There are fates worse than death.
Yeah, we're banging on the war core, baby. 2 hearts beating side by side. We're together like Kellis and Mukara, without that Klingon pride. In the middle of a 5-year mission, you were our lovely sight. We were banging on the war core, baby, and it just felt so